The main reason this story keeps getting bigger is not just because of what Joe Rogan said, it is because his comments gave shape to a feeling that many people online already had. For a long time, people were watching the situation in pieces. They were looking at clips, comments, public appearances, old videos, family silence, and strange timing. But when Rogan spoke about it, many people felt like all of those pieces were suddenly being placed into one picture. That is why the reaction was so strong. It was not only about one podcast moment, it was about a public figure saying out loud what many viewers had already been asking in private. What made his comments hit so hard was the idea that this whole situation does not look random to a lot of people. It looks organized, it looks controlled, it looks like events may have happened in a way that feels too exact to be simple chance. That does not prove anything by itself, and it is very important to say that clearly. But in the public mind, timing matters. When key people go quiet at key moments, when family members are suddenly nowhere to be seen, and when public questions are met with silence instead of direct answers, people do not just move on. They start looking closer. They start asking what they are not being told. A big part of why this story keeps growing is because of the silence around Charlie's family. People expected that after such a major loss, his family would be visible in some way. They expected to hear from those closest to him. They expected to see some shared public grief, some clear unity, or at least some public respect between the people who knew him best. But instead, many viewers believed they saw distance, they saw separation, they saw a public picture that felt incomplete. And once people notice that, they do not forget it. They keep coming back to the same question: why did the family seem pushed so far out of the story? That question became even bigger when claims began spreading that Charlie's parents were not included in a memorial event. If that claim is true, many people see that as deeply shocking. To them, that would not feel like a small mistake or a minor issue. It would feel like a serious decision. And that kind of decision changes the way people read everything else. Because once people begin to think that the family was being kept at a distance, every later move starts to look different. Every silence becomes heavier. Every missing appearance becomes more important. Every unanswered question begins to feel less like a mystery and more like a warning sign. Then there is the issue of Charlie's sister Mary, and this may be the part of the story that troubles people the most. Many online have said that her silence is one of the biggest missing pieces in the entire situation. People expected that if anyone might speak at some point, it could be a sister. Not because she had to, and not because the public has a right to demand it, but because in moments like this, people often look to close family for truth, feeling, and clarity. When that voice never comes, people begin to wonder why. And when there are reports that she may have been getting ready to speak before going completely quiet, that makes the silence feel even more serious in the eyes of the public. Now, that does not mean anyone should jump straight to dark conclusions. Silence can happen for many reasons. A person may be grieving. A person may be protecting their peace. A person may not want to be dragged into a public storm. A person may be scared of the media, scared of online attacks, or simply exhausted by the whole thing. All of those are real possibilities. But this is also why the public conversation has not ended. People do not just see silence. They see the timing of that silence. And timing is what Joe Rogan seemed to focus on in a way that made many listeners stop and think. That was the moment when the story changed from scattered rumors into a more focused public debate. Rogan's comments gave people a frame. He was not just reacting to gossip. He was pointing at patterns, or what he saw as patterns, and asking why so many strange things seemed to line up at once. For listeners, that mattered. When someone with a large platform speaks that way, it does not settle the story. It opens it wider. It gives more people a reason to go back, rewatch, compare, and ask harder questions. That is exactly what happened here. Another reason this story took off is the reaction to Erika's public image. Some clips of her have been shared again and again, especially moments from interviews where viewers said her facial expressions looked odd or unsettling. Online, people started giving those clips all kinds of meaning. Some treated them like signs of stress. Some called them fake. Some said it looked like performance. Others pushed much darker ideas. The truth is, internet culture is very good at turning small moments into huge symbols. Once a clip goes viral, it stops being just a clip. It becomes proof for people who already believe something, and it becomes a target for people who want to mock, question, or break down every frame. That matters because once a person becomes the center of that kind of attention, nothing they do is viewed in a normal way anymore. Every look becomes a clue. Every pause becomes a sign. Every sentence gets tested for hidden meaning. That does not make those readings fair, and it does not make them true. But it does explain why this story has not cooled down. The public is no longer just listening to statements. They are studying behavior. And when people feel like official answers are weak or missing, they trust those close readings even more. Then came the part of the story that added another layer of public suspicion, the video tied to intelligence-related content. A lot of discussion grew around the question of how Erika appeared in that kind of setting at all. Some people accepted the simple answer that it was just acting work. Others did not buy that explanation. They argued that the setting, the tone, and the way she spoke did not feel like someone reading lines for a basic job. That is where the conversation began to move away from ordinary public gossip and into much bigger claims. And that is also where things become more serious and more dangerous. Because once intelligence agencies get brought into a story, the internet does what it always does. It fills in every gap with its own version of the truth. A small detail becomes a major theory. One clip becomes a whole backstory. One question becomes a giant web of guesses. That is what we have seen here. Some people are fully convinced that there is a hidden structure behind the story. Others say that people are taking unrelated facts and forcing them into a dramatic shape. The real issue is that without clear answers, both sides keep growing stronger. One side sees cover-up, the other sees conspiracy thinking, and the public sits in the middle trying to figure out what can actually be proved. What made Joe Rogan's comments stand out is that he did not come at this like a person who had never seen public scandal before. He spoke in a way that made many listeners feel that he believed something about the story did not add up. That feeling matters because he has a way of saying things that can move a conversation fast. When he asks a question in a serious tone, millions of people hear that question differently. They do not hear it as random talk. They hear it as something worth paying attention to. And once that happens, the topic leaves smaller online spaces and becomes a wider public subject. The pressure that followed only made the story feel more intense. There were reports and claims that people connected to the situation were not happy with the direction of the conversation. Whether those reports are fully true or partly exaggerated, the effect was the same. It made the public even more curious. Because when people think someone is trying to shut a conversation down, they do not usually stop. They dig harder. They want to know why a topic feels so sensitive. They want to know who feels threatened by public questions. Even the idea of pressure can make a story feel bigger than it was before. That is one of the reasons this whole case keeps getting framed not just as a personal issue, but as a struggle over who controls the story. On one side, you have public figures, media voices, and online creators asking questions, pointing to patterns, and repeating concerns. On the other side, you have silence, denial, missing answers, and a sense that the full picture is still not out in the open. In that kind of fight, the lack of a clean response becomes its own kind of message. People start saying, if the answer is simple, then why does everything around it feel so hard to explain? Still, this is where people have to be careful. Public feeling is not proof. A pattern is not always a plan. A strange moment is not always a hidden sign. And a large number of people believing something does not make it true. That needs to be said clearly, because stories like this can turn into something else very fast. They can become less about truth and more about momentum. Once a story reaches that stage, every new person who talks about it adds heat, but not always light. That is why the biggest question now is not just what people suspect. The biggest question is what can actually be shown. Even so, the reason people keep watching is simple. Too many parts of the story still feel unfinished. People feel like they have seen enough to doubt the easy version, but not enough to know the real one. That space between doubt and proof is where these stories live the longest. It is where podcasts, clips, breakdowns, and comment sections grow. It is where every new interview gets searched for clues. It is where every old video gets pulled back into public view. And once a story enters that phase, it becomes very hard to close it unless something solid comes forward. The family angle keeps that pressure alive. People return to it again and again because it feels human, not just political. A public scandal can be pushed aside, a media fight can be ignored, but family pain, family silence, and family distance strike people at a deeper level. If those closest to Charlie are not clearly part of the public story, many viewers will keep asking why. That question does not go away just because others move on. It stays in the background, shaping how the entire situation is judged. Mary's silence, in particular, stays at the center of that feeling. To many people, her absence is not just a missing voice. It is the voice they think could change the shape of everything if it ever spoke. Again, that does not mean she owes the public anything. She does not. But from the outside, people see a silence that arrived at a very charged moment, and that makes them uneasy. They wonder if it was personal choice, private grief, outside pressure, or something else. And because there is no firm public answer, the silence itself has become part of the story. The same is true for Erika. The more public suspicion grows, the more people look at everything around her through a darker lens. That is why every clip, every old connection, every public statement, and every claim timeline detail keeps getting pulled back into debate. For some, she is being unfairly turned into the center of a storm driven by rumor. For others, she is at the center because too many details point back to her. That split is what keeps this story alive. It is not a settled public view. It is a battle over what the facts mean and whether the facts we have are even the full facts. Joe Rogan's role in all this is important because he helped move the story from the edge to the middle. He did not create every question, but his voice gave those questions force. Once that happened, people who had ignored the situation started paying attention. They started hearing about the old clips, the family concerns, the memorial issue, the silence, the public reactions, and the bigger claims. In that way, Rogan did more than comment. He helped turn a scattered storm into one shared conversation. And that conversation is really about trust. Do people trust the public story they were given? Do they trust the behavior they have seen? Do they trust the people asking questions? Do they trust the people staying silent? Every person watching this comes to a different answer. Some think the whole thing has gone far beyond reason. Some think the story is only now getting close to the truth. Most people are somewhere in between. They feel that something is off, but they also know how easy it is for the internet to go too far. That is why this story has such a strong grip on people. It has all the parts that pull public attention in and keep it there. It has power. It has media. It has silence. It has family. It has public doubt. It has big names speaking out. It has clips that people replay over and over. It has claims that sound too huge to ignore and too serious to accept without proof. And most of all, it has the one thing that drives long public obsession more than anything else: the sense that the full truth may still be hidden behind the version everyone was first told to believe. Right now, that is where things stand. People are still watching. They are still comparing timelines. They are still going back over interviews. They are still asking why some people disappeared from view. They are still asking why some questions get no clear answer. They are still asking whether the public has been given the full story or only the safest version of it. Until those questions are met with real clarity, this story is not going away. So in the end, the real reason Joe Rogan's comments hit so hard is not because they solved anything. It is because they made the doubt impossible to ignore. They gave public doubt a louder voice. They made people look at the same events in a sharper way. They pushed the story out of small circles and into a much wider space. And once a story reaches that point, it stops being only about one person or one claim. It becomes about the larger fear that powerful people, missing voices, and public silence may be hiding something the audience has not been allowed to see clearly. That is why the story keeps growing. That is why the questions keep coming. That is why every old clip still gets pulled back into the light. And that is why this situation now feels bigger than one podcast, one family conflict, or one public rumor. To many people watching, it has become a test of whether the truth can still break through when the public feels like too much has been kept in the dark for too long.